barakatuh, and welcome to the Muslim Matters podcast. I'm your host, Zainab bin Yunus, and our guests today are Mufti Abdullah Nana and Dr. Shafi Lodhi. Mufti Abdullah Nana is a graduate of Darul Uloom Azadville in South Africa and also has a background in business administration from UC Berkeley. In addition to his work as a retired teacher in the San Francisco Islamic School, he is the Imam of the Islamic Center of Mill Valley and provides Islamic expertise for many Muslim organizations. Dr. Shafi Lodhi is a forensic neuropsychiatrist. He served as faculty at Harvard Medical School before transitioning to full-time private practice. Dr. Lodhi is a hafiz and has led Tarawih prayers in multiple masajid across the United States. Welcome to the podcast, both of you. So we're happy to have you, very excited to have this discussion. Today's topic is one that's gained more attention recently than it ever has before. So the issue of commission-based fundraising by Muslim organizations, whether they're charity organizations or masajid. And this came to light through the revelation that Khalid Beydoun, who's a very known figure, especially online, was paid over $2 million by Human Appeal USA for quote-unquote professional fundraising services in 2024. And this was based on Beydoun's generation of over $7 million through an online campaign for Human Appeal, translating to Beydoun taking almost 29 cents of every dollar donated. Now, this particular setup isn't unique to Beydoun, right? Like, we see this all over the place. It's part of commission-based fundraising that takes place everywhere. There's influencer campaigns online, celebrity speakers at fundraising events, especially in Ramadan. You have those bougie gala dinners. You've got very fancy events where the draw is these big names. Now, can you tell us what the issue is with the structure of commission-based fundraising? Dr. Shafi, if you'd like to touch on it just briefly, and then Mufti Abdullah, if you can elaborate as well on the Islamic angle of this.
Sure. So, Bismillah. So starting, I think the simplest way to put it is that when a Muslim, is ever sat in a fundraiser, Ramadan or any time, and given money for a fundraising where there's commission-based compensation, they've basically participated in a transaction that they never agreed to, right?
Yeah.
When someone comes to the mic, they make an appeal, and when they're talking about Gaza, they're talking about orphans, and you reach out, let's say you give $100 because you want to donate. What you don't know is that maybe 20, sometimes 30% of that is actually not going to the goal, it's going to the fundraiser. And that's a transaction, that's an agreement, a contract that's already been signed between the masjid or the organization and the fundraiser. And this is their commission. It's a private arrangement, almost a side deal.
Yeah.
And you're giving this money thinking that, okay, this is the deal. I'm giving my money for a cause, but really you're giving money for two deals, one that you're aware of and one that you have no idea is going to, weren't a party to, you didn't consent to. And if you had known, if they had told you beforehand that, hey, by the way, $29 out of every 100 you're giving to us is going to the person holding the microphone, that might have changed whether you gave that money or how much money you gave. So it's not, the issue is that donors really need to have that transparency of where their money is going and that it's going to the cause that they want it to be going to.
Yes. And just to add, from the fiqh perspective, from the Islamic perspective, there are also problematic aspects here as well. This form of fundraising has been used widely in the past, specifically for institutes, for dozen Darul Ulooms. And I guess the thought process is, if the fundraiser or if the agent is receiving a mountain commission, he's motivated to work, he or she is motivated to work harder. But unfortunately, the problematic aspects are there because the donors don't know, and the donors don't know where all the money which they're donating is going, and right, this unethical and problematic arrangement is being made on the side. So I think from an Islamic perspective as well, there are major concerns. And just to add, I think there's also something which no one has really talked about and considered. There's also a spiritual dimension as well, and I hope to cover that in brief later as well.
So this seems to be a multiple angle problematic issue, right? So on one hand, Dr. Shafi, as you mentioned, some people would think twice if we knew that 10 cents, 20 cents, 50 cents out of our donated dollar is going to somebody who's not the intended recipient. And Mufti Abdullah, you're saying that there's issues in terms of the structure of this entire enterprise and the way that these contracts should be taking place, essentially. So the first thing I want to ask is, like, why are these commission-based fundraisers necessarily so bad, right? Like people say these people who speak and who host donation campaigns, they deserve to get paid. It's part of their job as influencers, as public speakers, as scholars. Everybody needs a little extra income. Why is it so bad that they get paid for this? And Zakat workers get paid. That's something that we know from our tradition. Why do we have a problem with other people getting paid to raise donations?
Yeah. So I guess the best way to describe it would be it's the manner in which they're getting paid. If they're raising funds, for example, and the donors there donating with the specific intention of helping the people of Gaza, and now the fundraiser is taking 30% or 20% of the total proceeds, right? It's from an Islamic perspective, it's a shart facet, it's a problematic transaction. So in fact, in Islamic law, the transaction should be canceled, the amount should be returned. But unfortunately, no one does this. It's widespread and everyone's doing this. So from Islamic perspective, it's a problematic transaction. And the donors, also ethically, the donors don't know where the money is going. They're not being told this information in advance. So there are awareness. Fundraising has been going on for a long time, and charity has been given for centuries. But there is a way to do it properly, and we'll discuss that inshallah in that.
So you're saying like this very process or the structure of this percentage based commission based fundraising is in and of itself Islamically invalid. That's
Yes.
pretty big considering that all of these are Islamic organizations that usually have the face of a celebrity sheikh attached to them. That's something pretty hefty for people to consider.
And I think to add to what you're saying, what's also happened, there is a celebrity speaker circuit already, mashallah. Celebrity sheikhs, mashallah, they go and they do programs. But unfortunately, what's also developed in North America, there's a celebrity fundraiser circuit as well. And these individuals go from fundraiser to fundraiser, and they're making literally thousands of dollars in the name of other charities. So it's, I would say, just as we talk about celebrity imam or sheikh culture, celebrity fundraiser culture is just as bad, if not worse.
So
And
one
also,
other question, just following on that, sorry, is that when we talk about fiqh, charity itself is generally, it falls under the category of gifts, not transactions. How do we differentiate like the difference here? How does this impact the discussion?
Yeah. So I think it's also important we differentiate between zakat in particular and optional charity, right? So zakat, I think a lot of the outrages, Muslims in North America are misusing millions of dollars of zakat funds, which have specific laws, which have specific rules. And all these organizations, when it comes to collecting, they have the ads, they have their YouTube ads, they have their Facebook ads. When it comes to collecting zakat, they have no problem with it. But the issue is specifically how they're distributing it. And the laws connected to that. Charity, yes, there is more leeway when it comes to charity. So the laws are less strict. They're much more looser. But the issue, I think, the main issue, concern which I have, is the millions of dollars of zakat which is being collected by these organizations, and it's being misused.
I totally agree. That's absolutely a massive problem. And there's actually quite a lot of discussion these days about transparency around zakat funds and so on and so forth. But going back to these organizations and how they use the way that they use commission-based fundraising, how do those two things impact each other necessarily? Are they, from where I'm sitting, they seem to be slightly different issues because on one hand, you have those who are giving in charity in good faith, and these organizations that are taking it. As you said, there are those who say this is zakat eligible, and I can definitely see the problem there. How does the way that fundraisers get paid play into this?
so if I can jump in there, one of the things with commission-based fundraising is that I think it's really the most visible symptom of a very deep just transparency crisis of how money is being mishandled. But going back to the very first question, which is, don't people who collect zakat or who collect charity deserve to get paid? And I think that is an issue in and of itself, like a question in and of itself. But the point of the article we recently wrote was about commission-based fundraising specifically. And one of the things about commission-based is that, as you notice, this is very prevalent in the Muslim community in fundraising at masajid, at various organizations. And this is actually a place where Muslim nonprofits depart very strongly from the general nonprofit sector. So pretty much every single professional nonprofit fundraising organization, and they have their list of ethical guidelines of how someone who's a professional fundraiser should fundraise. By unanimous consensus, all of them consider commission-based fundraising to be a red line. Like this is not something a fundraiser should be doing. And the reason why speaks to the bigger issues at play. One of it is the transparency that we've already talked about, that the person donating doesn't know where their money is going. And, fiqh issues aside, it's at the very least deceptive, right? The person doesn't know where their money is going. And, I'll leave Mufti to discuss the fiqh of that. But at the very least, we can all agree that that is deceptive if the person doesn't
Mhm.
know where their money is going. But then there's also other issues that come into play when you have commission-based fundraising. One is exactly where the fundraising even happens to begin with, right? If a fundraiser who is very motivational can convince people to open their wallets, is trying to decide where they're going to fundraise, a commission-based fundraising really incentivizes them to go to the most wealthy places and to fundraise for whatever cause is going to raise the most money rather than whatever cause needs the most money. So, if a fundraiser is choosing between two masajid to go to in a city, they're going to go to the masjid, which probably actually needs a fundraiser less, where people can write checks for 5 and 6 figure sums. And the smaller masajid, which can't do that, they're not going to get the fundraiser who has the ability, because that fundraiser is, 20% of a million is a lot more than 20% of 10,000.
Yeah.
So it entrenches inequalities that are already there. And then finally, it puts the fundraiser really at cross purposes to what they're fundraising, because every single dollar that the person is donating, the fundraiser is getting more money and more money from there, versus a flat fee structure of, fundraiser getting paid a certain amount. The more they donate, their fee is already kind of decided. They're not competing with the donors with the cause for money. Their money is different, and the money going to the charity is different. So it puts them at cross purposes when they're doing a commission-based fundraising. And that is why, again, across the board, all professional fundraising organizations consider this to be a red line. But, a lot of Muslim organizations are not following, a lot of Muslim fundraisers are not following the guidelines of the field.
That's a really great point that you brought up about the entrenched inequalities that occurred due to this commission-based fundraising. I think that's really important to point out, especially when we are dealing with a smaller masjid that's fundraising for local projects versus overseas ones. And of course, that's something that now more than ever, there's a lot of people are struggling with the sense of guilt and obligation. Of course, we want to fundraise and donate to Gaza. Of course, we want to donate to Sudan. Of course, we want to donate to the Uyghur Muslims, to the Rohingya Muslims. Those are all causes that are near and dear to our heart. But then we often end up forgetting about local food banks. We forget about those who are struggling in our own neighborhoods with homelessness, with those who are extremely ill, and like in the States, they have medical debt. And that often ends up getting neglected just in general. And as you mentioned, the whole choosing where you're going to go to, where you're going to get the most money ends up impacting at that scale as well, perhaps unintentionally. But yet that definitely is a very real consequence of this practice. I also wanted to bring up the concept of this celebrity circuit and the flat fee that you mentioned. On one hand, somebody could say, again, this is their line of work. Why are we critiquing this? And even if people take flat fees, there's often critique over how much they're taking. Is that something that we necessarily need to focus on? Or is the emphasis more on, hey, this commission based practice, which is now so widespread, just needs to be knocked out?
So I think there's two parts to that. One is I do think the practice itself of commission-based fundraising is problematic for the reasons we mentioned. Um, but the other aspect is, okay, well, fine, let's do a flat fee, and now the flat fee is, let's say, $2 million, right? So the amount the person is getting isn't different; it's just a flat fee. I think that's a separate problem, and it is a problem, right? I think that it makes sense for people to be compensated for their job. But at the same time, as Abdullah talked about, there is that fundraising circuit. And so switching over to a flat fee solves one problem, which is the commission-based fundraising problem, which is a problem in and of itself. But excessive fees are a problem in and of themselves. And there was a recent article by brother Ahmed Sheikh, who went through about 17 Muslim charities and talked about different issues that they had. One of them being that there are scholars who write zakat policies that are unenforceable, and then there's the scholars who are also doing the fundraising for them. So I think that the commission-based fundraising is the tip of the iceberg, but there are larger issues at play with how Islamic fundraising is often being done in our communities.
Just to add to this, I think awareness is key. Sadly, I think before this whole Khalid Baidoun scandal and before 2 months ago, most people were not aware of this, right? There have been just initial discussions, right? One person on social media asked, do you guys realize how much commission these speakers are getting when they're doing programs? And I think the vast majority of the Muslim community is unaware of this. And if they were aware, I think there'd be more pressure on these organizations, and hopefully reform would start. So I think it really starts with the Muslim community, but I think it's also a system which is unsustainable. Right? If you're trying to raise $1 million for orphans in Gaza, and if your fundraising speaker is charging $500,000, it makes it very difficult.
So on that note, I fully agree with you, actually. I think it's quite distasteful. But someone would argue that this is the price of business on one hand. And also there is the element of, if you pay X amount to celebrity speaker, they're guaranteed to bring in a massive number of donated funds, compared to if you didn't hire this person, you didn't pay them whatever commission or flat fee. But if you just brought somebody who is lesser known, or just don't hire anybody out at all, you're going to fundraise much less. So instead of donating $1 million for Gaza, you end up with 100,000. And then the people in Gaza are getting less overall. What would your answer be to that?
So my answer is going to be more from a spiritual aspect. I think we need to change the focus of the fundraising in the first place, right? The scholars of fiqh have also said this as well. Right? So I'm just going to lay this out there. I would rather raise $100,000 from sincere individuals who are donating from the bottom of their heart. They don't need that to be wined and dined at a 5-star restaurant. They don't need that to be entertained by a celebrity speaker. They're giving from the bottom of their hearts. I would rather have $100,000 that way than $1 million without any blessings and involving these celebrity fundraisers. That's my opinion, and I think there's a lot of backing on that as well. So our priorities need to be changed.
I definitely agree. The culture of fundraisers needs to change entirely. I find it very distasteful that we have this expectation that people are going to donate only once they show up to a gala event and it feels like a Hollywood thing or whatever. I think that's quite awful. But then the counter argument to that could be, well, is this not similar to making the Quraysh noblemen feel honored? And there's nothing wrong with making people feel good if the intention is to get them to contribute to good.
So I think there's a few thoughts on that. One, I think one of the things you mentioned is the cost of doing business is what some people say about this. And I think the problem with framing it that way is that it treats the donor's money as if it's the organization's money. But that's not where the money is. The money belongs to the person donating the money until they give it. And it's given with an intention to feed families, to help orphans. So if an organization decides that 20 or 30% of the gift is the cost of doing business, they're making that decision with someone else's money without telling the person whose money actually it is that this is the cost of doing it. And so if that is the case, then, let's have that transparency. Let the masjid tell the people that the cost of raising funds tonight is 30 cents on the dollars. And some people might decide, well, maybe it's worth it. I want 30%. I think it's fine if 30% of my money goes to the fundraiser. Others might say, and I think most people would say this, well, in that case, I'll take my money elsewhere. I'll find another charity that isn't paying the fundraiser the 30%. I think the other argument that you mentioned that people bring up is that, well, these people bring in massive numbers. These are celebrities. They're able to get people to to spend more money. So yeah, we'll pay this person $50,000 in commission, but he raised $400,000 in one night. That's a net positive that we wouldn't have had otherwise. Like we wouldn't have gotten this money without him. The commission paid for itself. And I think that argument itself is problematic. Number one, the money didn't just come from thin air, right? When the fundraiser is raising, $407 million, that money was already in the room, and those donors were already there. They were intending to give it. The speaker, I think it's debatable how much of a charitable impulse the speaker is creating. Just from a scientific point of view, you need to have a control group. How do we know of this as an example of the 2 million out of the 7 million raised? If it wasn't a celebrity, just a normal person just kind of raising money, maybe it would have been 6 million that had been raised. Maybe it would have been 5 million that had been raised. But we really can't attribute that all that money only was donated because a fundraiser was over there. So, if we say, throwing some hypotheticals in there, guest speakers 50,000, he raised $400,000 in a night. But, if without the fundraiser with just 0%, or I'd say a $1,000 flat fee, they raised $375,000 in the night, they still come out ahead. So, it's not true that this money is only coming from the fundraiser. We have to know how much extra is coming because a fundraiser is there. And I don't think we really have a good answer for that. The second thing, which I think is a bigger thing though, and this is one of the reasons why a lot of fundraising organizations really avoid that commission-based setup, is because this type of commission-based fundraising, it creates a dependency that's terrible for any organization, for any nonprofit long term. Right? Once a masjid or a charity starts relying on commission fundraisers to hit their fundraising targets, they stop building their own donor relationships. And that is really where a good fundraiser in the nonprofit world, that's where they really bring their value to the table, by helping nonprofits cultivate donor relationships. And so that they have this internal fundraising capacity rather than like this big name, big night model all at once. You want to develop, like the nonprofit wants to develop internal donor relationships so that it's sustainable and they're getting money for whatever cause that they want to be in. And commission-based fundraising works 100% opposite to that, because it's not a big, fat paycheck in one night for the organizer. And then I think the third thing, which Mufti Abdullah definitely mentioned, but I think, really needs to be emphasized, and this is the one that matters the most to a Muslim audience. The ends don't justify the means, right? Like, okay, maybe this person brought in $5 million, $7 million. And I understand the appeal of that argument. But the question is whether we need to skim 25, 30% off the top through a hidden arrangement to get that money. And let's say we take that off. Let's say, the person is genuinely bringing in a net increase by skimming off of the top. Even if the end result of not doing this is a smaller number, since when do we as Muslims accept that a bigger number justifies a compromised method? By that logic, the masjid should take all of their extra money and put it in a riba bank account and then collect that interest because they got extra percentage. And I don't think anyone would say that's ethical or that's acceptable. So we hold ourselves to standards even when the alternative might produce a smaller number, because we trust that Allah will provide us through halal means. And so that tawakkul is, the core of this argument, that first, what is right? And then after that, how can we maximize, not the opposite?
So to push back just a little bit on that, and just to clarify, I don't even agree with this. This is for the sake of argument. People will argue the organizations wouldn't be bringing in these celebrity speakers and the commission-based fundraising if it didn't actually work out for them. Like, there is an incentive for them to do this, because if they knew that they could raise chunk of money even without those speakers, then they'll have less overhead anyways, right? Like they still get to quote unquote keep however much was raised without giving more. So in sense of saying that you don't really know that these fundraisers are bringing in more money anyways, well, if they weren't, then the organizations wouldn't be relying on this. Do you agree with that?
I don't actually agree with that. I think in order for us to say that for sure, we would actually need to have a comparison. Now, a lot of times things just keep going because there's that inertia that, okay, well, this person has brought in a lot of money, and so let's keep on using them. It's really, I think that's a an assumption that people don't challenge because it's taken at face value. But I don't know for sure if that actually is true. But but kind of the net corollary, let's say it is true. Let's say that the fundraiser brings in more money for the organization. Yes, in the short term, that might be true. But what about the long-term cost to donor trust? Because we're living through that right now, right? The story broke and people giving money are furious and they're questioning every organization that they've ever given to. People are looking at different charities and saying like, okay, well, I can't really give zakat to any of these.
Yeah.
And so there's this erosion of trust where, yeah, the commission model can generate big numbers on a given night, but it's doing that by poisoning the well the whole time, so to speak. And so, yeah, maybe it works. Again, I don't know if I 100% agree with that, but let's say it does. It works for who and for how long? And I think one of the other things which isn't talked about that Abdullah kind of alluded to is the whole celebrity fundraising circuit, where it kind of becomes a you scratch my back, I scratch yours, where there's this symbiotic relationship between the organization and the fundraiser. And then when that happens, which I think it does happen, it's really not true to say that they wouldn't be doing this if it didn't work. Like people can have other reasons for doing it, even if it's actually not a net positive for their organization and their cause.
I've watched, right, in the last 10 to 15 years, I've watched organizations move towards these celebrity fundraising circuit and having these banquets and having these fundraising dinners. And there's that a lot of it is monkey see, monkey do, just jumping on the trend. And as Dr. Shafi has been saying, the data is not there to really prove that it works. And I think looking at it from another perspective as well, just the fundraising dinners, if the fundraising dinner itself is costing $100,000 and you want to raise $500,000, it's a lot of money that's going into sunk costs, and there's no guarantee that you're going to come out on top. I think there's a lot of angles to look at this, and how effective is the system? Even if we would accept that commission-based fundraising is permissible, how effective is it really? The data isn't there.
There
And
seems to
one
be, just in general, that there is a lack of data and statistics in terms of the benefits of fundraising through celebrity speakers versus not, the benefits of fundraising through these gala dinners or not. And so there's lack of, statistics on which one is more successful anyways, generally. But then also the issue of the lack of financial transparency, which goes back to what you were both talking about originally, in terms of the donor doesn't know how much is going to the speaker from their dollar that is donated. And Ahmed Sheikh really leans on this in his critiques of charity organizations and the way they operate in terms of the paperwork, numbers that don't add up. And I think that's just really concerning in general. And it also ties to something else that I was thinking about that you mentioned in the beginning, Dr. Shafi, which is that Muslim organizations are engaging in this practice of commission-based fundraising that is actually not considered acceptable by the experts in nonprofits, so the Association of Fundraising Professionals. So outside of Muslims, it is
Yeah.
already determined that this is wrong, this is bad, this is unethical, this is not allowed. So two questions there. One is, how are Muslim organizations getting away with doing this on such a mass scale if it's not okay? And number two, are there legal consequences to this if somebody really wanted to pursue this and be like, hey, you're engaging in these, is it illegal to do this?
I don't think it's considered illegal. My understanding is that it's considered unethical by these organizations, but I don't think these are like binding recommendations by the organizations.
Just to add to that as well, I think this whole situation is really, it's preying on the ignorance of the average Muslim. Because the average Muslims haven't said anything about this for 20 years, they've let this system operate for 20 years or longer. I think part of this is just the lack of knowledge. And hopefully now the change will begin. And I think these articles, these podcasts, this effort to raise awareness, I think this is the way forward, inshallah. And I think by next year, I think we're going to see, I'm already seeing it. I'm seeing already, I'm just a normal person, but on my Facebook ads, I'm seeing we have a third party, X organization has a third party that's approving its zakat. those are the same fundraisers. I'm watching these ads and I'm laughing. But I see them try, at least in the last 1 or 2 weeks, I see this effort to catch up on what's happened. And the organizations, it looks like the community is worried. All the organizations are getting, the heat is being turned up on them.
Do you think this will end up just fading away though? Because that happens to our community a lot of the times. Like a
Yes.
scandal will break, we'll have all these
Mm,
discussions, and then the organizations will say, "Oh, we heard you. We're going to change something." And I've already seen something along these lines. I think with Human Appeal, where they try to backtrack. They put out a video saying, "Oh, we've heard you. We're going to change XYZ process." Done this with other organizations, writing to them and said, "Oh yeah, we'll change." And then a year later, he goes back and checks, and they really haven't changed anything. Or they moved certain things around or they added another form here or there, but in concrete practice, nothing's actually changed. And given that the average person is not going to sit and do a deep dive on all these organizations and their finances and their paperwork, how can we encourage people to be a little more savvy and hold these organizations accountable while recognizing that the average person isn't going to be doing this like investigative journalism?
Yeah, I think there's three layers to that, or three potential areas of solution basically to this. One is for the organizations themselves, right? The ones who are doing fundraising, for them to switch to a reasonable flat fee salary based compensation. And that's really one of the things we call for in our paper, or in our article. I think realistically, you're right. Like I think most organizations, they have found something that's working. I mean, 30% for their fundraiser, however much for themselves, they're doing it because it looks for their status quo. So I think that yes, most organizations are probably not going to make much of a change at this level. And in the article you referenced with Ahmed Sheikh, where he reviewed 17 major charity organizations and really couldn't recommend a single one for zakah. I mean, that should alarm us, but I think that also tells us that this is kind of a very deep problem that's not going to change overnight. The layer below that is the actual fundraisers, or at the very least, the scholars, the masjid leaderships. I think that is something that can potentially have a little bit more room for change. I think a lot of people who are involved in their masajid, I think even a lot of scholars would say like, okay, this isn't right and we need to change something at this level. And so masjid leadership they can do their investigation, like only fundraisers who meet a certain threshold are allowed to come into our masjid to do fundraising. Obviously, there is a conflict of interest, as we've talked about, as Mufti Abdullah mentioned, as Ahmed Sheikh mentioned, that a lot of the people doing the fundraising, a lot of people who are in masjid leadership or who are involved in Islamic organizations are themselves doing fundraising. So there's a little bit of a conflict of interest there, but there are plenty of people who, even if it's not good for them financially, if they feel that this is ethically right, they will speak out against it. And we have Mufti Abdullah right here on the podcast, who's one of those scholars. And I think the third layer, which is a layer that has the most strength over here, is all of us, the people donating, giving money. And yes, I agree. Most of us, probably the majority of us, are not going to be doing a lot of intensive research to figure out how much is actually going here and there. But we can simply ask, okay, how's a fundraiser being compensated? How much of my money is going to the cause? There are a lot of third party organizations, Charity Navigator, things like this, that look at, is this charity, how much are they skimming off the top? Yes or no? It's not perfect. There's ways to game the system. There's different people who can manipulate the numbers, but it's a start. And I think that is something, certainly with the younger generation, is something that people do look at before they give for zakah. Like, how does this charity rank on Charity Navigator? I think those are things that if enough people start doing, well, the organizations either have to change their model or they lose support and they wither away. I think that is the level that will have the most impact.
There's also a question I have for you, Mufti Abdullah Nana, related to this. You guys actually provided a great list of suggestions in terms of the reform that we need that you mentioned in the article. Here's an idea, and going to be very clear, I did not come up with this. My husband Siraj did. So what is your perspective on the idea that we have like a certification board for these zakat organizations or these charity organizations, the way that we have for hand slaughtered meat? Or halal restaurants, for example, or for any restaurants. Would this be something that we could actually pull off as a community? Is there some way that this could happen?
So scholars, a number of us imams have had this conversation, and I think a lot of people would also support this as well. But the challenge you're going to get, I'm just going to be 100% honest, brutally honest with you. I tend to speak up on issues, and I can take the heat for it. And I've gone through a lot of phases in my life because of it. But I'm worried because of it's an entrenched system, and I'm worried because of conflicts of interest, and because there's millions of dollars at stake here. I'm worried that it's gonna face opposition from those specific members in the community, and I think it's gonna be very difficult. But I'm 100% behind it, and I'll take one for the team. I'm already taking one for the team, but I'm worried it's gonna face some challenges. But I think that is the way forward. You thorough audits and clear answers to the zakat policies, and thorough audits, and a proper vetting system that's run by an independent group of people and an independent group of scholars is a solution. And I just wanted to add this collaboration. Sheikh is a lawyer, Dr. Shafi, mashallah, is a doctor. The interesting thing, I think the solution is going to come from a collaboration of people from different industries and concerned Muslims. I think that's what it's going to come from.
Because I was literally about to say, I think the three of you need to do a collaboration to really get this movement going. Because you're right, we need to have people from multiple different sectors and angles to address these issues. So like lawyers to wade through the legal paperwork, accountants to figure out the money trail, scholars to really determine the Islamic ethics, and are people trying to use certain technical loopholes as they do with the whole halal mortgage situation, right? All of these things need fresh sets of eyes that can understand what's going on in different aspects of the game, and then all of you coming together and sharing those findings and cross-referencing with one another, and just really having this really strict set of standards that organizations that want to fundraise for quote-unquote Islamic purposes need to uphold. And I think something that we really need to emphasize here is what you mentioned, Mufti Abdullah, is that this very concept of percentage-based commissions on fundraising efforts is considered Sharan incorrect in the first place. Now, it would be interesting to see if other scholars would object to that. I obviously have zero expertise in Islamic finance, let alone the fiqh of transactions and zakat and so on and so forth. But that's certainly something to give us all significant pause in the first place. Could you guys also, just before we wrap up, go through your list of suggested reforms in addition to this brilliant idea of a certification board for fundraisers?
If you'd allow me to address one other point which I mentioned in my introduction, I'm also just stepping back and looking at things from one other angle, which is spiritual element. At the end of the day, every single one of us, we want the impact, right? That's why at these fundraisers, that's why we get so emotional. We're giving that. We hear about the people in Gaza without water. We hear about people not being able to make iftar because they don't have food. The main goal, what is the main goal behind all this in our worship and our prayers? We want there to be impact, right? We want tomorrow that person we see in the video, or we want that person who's suffering, we want that suffering to go away. And I think the part that's there worrying me looking at all this, right, and looking at these money arguments, even if that 4 million is raised to the celebrity speaker, I sincerely think the blessings aren't there. And I think the impact reaching those individuals, right? And I'm sorry, I participated in some of these gala dinners. Dude, I don't feel any blessings there. I don't feel comfortable there at all. And I think just the whole approach of fundraising, these online ads, I'm sorry to use this, but I feel we're pimping out these small children.
Yeah.
You asking them, how do you feel, or why are you sad? And you putting their faces on social media. I think we're pimping out these children. We're exploiting them, especially if we're using it for administrative costs for our own organization. We're misusing this whole charity system. And as I said this earlier as well, I would rather give that $10,000 sincerely, secretly, that reaches the poor. I'd rather have the $10,000 given sincerely than $10 million given through this whole system.
Yeah, that's a very powerful point that you mentioned. It's been the topic of discussion for, again, in non-Muslim circles for a very long time. And unfortunately, only in very rare areas have I seen this discussion in Muslim circles. but the poverty porn of it all and the exploitation, as you mentioned, of people who are truly struggling and suffering. And we're basically weaponizing and taking away their dignity for the sake of our advertising to contribute towards paperwork, essentially. Going forward from that, just to wrap up, Dr. Shafi, would you like to just sum up the suggestions that you've had in terms of suggested reform?
Yeah, so we laid out a few of the things that we think may be helpful. One of the biggest things is all of these non-Muslim nonprofit organizations have a code of ethical standards for when it comes to fundraising. So at the very least, our national Muslim organizations, fiqh councils, nonprofit networks should develop and publish kind of explicitly saying that this type of fundraising is not something that we consider to be ethical. Um, that's not binding. It doesn't force anyone to do anything, but it's the bare minimum where it establishes a standard for Muslim nonprofits that we don't do this type of fundraising. I think at the masjid level, one of the things that we recommended is that every fundraising effort should really include mandatory disclosures at the point of donation, like how much money is actually going to things other than the cause. So it doesn't have to be broken up into every little nitty gritty, but just this much money, this percentage is going to the cause, and this percentage is going to administrative overhead, third party compensation, and whatever.
Yeah. To add to that, Dr. Shafi, it's interesting how the fast food industry was pushing against any form of disclaimer or nutrition information about their products. We grew up in the generation in the 1980s, right? You go to the McDonald's, you go to a fast food place, there was no disclosure. Now they fought against it, but now some of their products on the menu, you have the information about it, you can make a more informed decision. And maybe that's the direction to go for fundraising as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I think transparency is definitely the key. And that, ties into other two things we recommended. One is that the nonprofits should themselves publish an accessible, just kind of plain language report showing how funds are allocated. Right now, all nonprofits have to file an IRS form that shows, and that's how this whole Holiday controversy came to light. But these are just kind of buried in the tax file works. People have to go through a lot of effort to pull them out. At the very least, a Muslim nonprofit is being transparent and honest, then just put on easily understandable plain language report how funds are being allocated. And then at the masjid level, masjids, local organizations should just ban commission-based fundraising. I think that's something that's very easy for masjid board to do, and then to publicly disclose how much they're paying any fundraiser from outside who's visiting, whether that's 5% or 75%. If you feel that's an acceptable amount, then the people who are giving money should know. And I think the final thing is for the donors themselves. Like, yes, at the end of the day, if we give our money with the right intention and we want it to go wherever we think it's going, we also have a little bit of responsibility to do at least a little bit of legwork, at least ask questions before you give. And when you do give money, try to give money to more reputable organizations where you feel comfortable that this is actually going to where it's supposed to be going. I think this can start like a ripple effect where the first organizations that start doing this, that increase their transparency, will get more donor money from the people who care about this, and eventually other places will inshallah follow.
I think that's a really great set of suggestions, and I think they're very practical as well. At the end of the day, it really ends up depending on, as usual, the willingness of the community to stick to our guns and be consistent in demanding accountability, in demanding change, and being willing to take one for the team, as Mufti Abdullah says, those who are in positions of leadership themselves, knowing that others, your peers, your colleagues, are going to push back heavily against you. But I think this is just one of many discussions of reckoning that we need to have in our community, and not just stop at the discussion part, but really put into action and change this entire culture of exploitative fundraising that also in many ways dabbles in a lot of just very gross consumerism and playing
Yeah.
off of people social media addictions, not gonna lie, especially when I see the way that that influencers really get looped into this whole fundraising campaign business. So there's a lot of different angles to this, and I'm sure we could talk about this all day. Are there any passing final comments, remarks that you guys would like to leave with our audience?
No, I'll leave it for Abdullah. And I guess the only thing wrapping up is just emphasizing the point that Mufti Abdullah mentioned that at the end of the day, when we give money, when we give charity, this is, our action. Well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who is providing for the person in the end. So the question really for us is not the number that we're raising, the number that we're sending over, but if we're doing things in halal and in ethical manner. So I think that's something for all of us to keep in mind as we give our money this Ramadan.
And maybe just to add as well, I'm really happy that we had a podcast on this. I think knowledge is power. We've seen many of these grassroots movements, whether it's in the halal industry, whether it's in the food industry. We've seen a lot of these the grassroots movements that have been able to bring out change. Look at the organic movement, right? Also, I watched this organic movement grow from nothing. There was a time I remember in 1980s, 1990s, Muslims did not care about organic at all. Today, you'll find a good amount of us shopping at Whole Foods and Spouts and paying extra for this organic products. So there's been a change. I think there's been a number of parallel movements in the food movement and also political movement as well. It's just last parallel I want to bring in when even this whole discussion on Zionism and Israel and what's been going on, we've watched a silent revolution, in my opinion, in the last 2 years. Things have changed, public opinion has changed, and I think there's a lot of parallels and a lot of lessons we can learn. I think it starts with the empowerment, people empowering themselves through knowledge and educating themselves and listening to podcasts like this. And inshallah, each person makes a difference. And so I think where we're going to see, inshallah, I wouldn't call this year judgment year or judgment day. But I think this year is going to be a make it or break it for a lot of organizations. And I think they will, if they see enough of a loss, if they see enough of their donations go down, I think we'll see them making changes and we'll see them running around. As I said, I'm just scrolling through Facebook. I already see people running around. Our organizations will vet through these Islamic scholars. Our zakat policies are vetted through Islamic scholars. So they're running around. They're in panic mode already. I can sense it. They're in panic mode. But I think this Ramadan will be a make or break for a lot of them. And I pray and I hope. I think there's a lot of organizations will be forced to. They'll be coming down to their knees. And they'll be forced to make some positive changes, inshallah.
Jazakallah khair to both of you for contributing your time, your expertise on this matter, your thoughts. It's a really necessary conversation to have. I pray that this is the year that we really see a massive shift in just the Muslim community in general, considering our fundraising habits and our fundraising culture and everything that comes with it. So barakallahu feekum. I really appreciate your time. And I am sure that our listeners have benefited as well. And to the listeners, please share your own thoughts, your comments, your concerns, and be a part of this conversation. Jazakumullah khair. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Jazakallah khair for hosting us.
Jazakallah khairan.